Thank you all. I can't get this phrase, well-lubricated kibitzers, out of my mind now. Thank you, Norm.
We all want to know what Norm had for breakfast and want to know whether it's legal.
So welcome, everybody, to this event, to this panel, and thank you for coming. Thanks to everybody. Hello, everybody following the live stream. And this is a bipartisan conference designed to inform the public about the grave threat to our freedoms and what we can do about it. And we brought together people from across the political spectrum, from quite different political experiences and backgrounds, who are united in their dedication to doing whatever we need to do to save our democracy. This is an anti-autocracy conference because autocracy is what we are looking at if Donald Trump comes back to the White House. And I know there are many Americans who feel this might be exaggerated, even after MAGA tried to overthrow the government to keep Trump in power illegally. In my line of work, this is called a coup attempt. And somehow a lot of people have forgotten about this. So Trump is even now continuing to use his rallies to market strongman rule to Americans. He's been very successful in marketing autocrats as superior leaders. So just a few days ago, he praised Xi Jinping, the communist dictator, as, quote, brilliant because he rules with an iron fist. I'm here as an expert on autocracy because I know the stakes of this election. I know the stakes of electing somebody who thinks that ruling with an iron fist is a good thing. It is MAGA dictatorship or American democracy. It is repression, the iron fist coming down on us, or freedom. I've seen what happens to societies when corrupt leaders and their allies gain power based on division and hatred. And Project 2025 is a recipe for mass chaos, abuses of power, and dysfunction in government. It aligns not only with present autocracies, such as the Hungary of Viktor Orban, which, by the way, was just ranked the most corrupt country in the EU. And this is what is being held up as the model for us. But it also aligns with past dictatorships. I was doing some research on Mussolini, the early Mussolini, and I was actually shocked to find how closely Project 2025 aligns with some of the major precepts of the laws for public safety that Mussolini passed in the mid-20s after he survived 4 assassination attempts. And they converted Italy from a dictatorship, from a democracy to a dictatorship. Among other things, these laws justified the mass firing of non-loyal civil servants and the dismissal of judges on grounds of, quote, political incompatibility. So this panel starts our day's work with a look at the threats American democracy would pose to bipartisan governance, an independent judiciary, national security and intelligence, and civil rights. And we have an all-star panel here, as you see. We don't have to succumb to the horrors of authoritarianism. We can stop this before it starts if we are informed of the stakes and best strategies for democracy protection. And that's why we're here today. So let's get started. I'm going to introduce the speakers in order of their interventions. I'm going to ask 2 rounds of questions. And the first question, if everybody can keep to 5 minutes, otherwise I'll make a kind of gesture to you. So we have Congressman Charlie Dent. He's Vice President of the Aspen Institute, Executive Director of its Congressional Program, and Senior Advisor with Our Republican Legacy. He previously represented the 15th Congressional District of Pennsylvania for 7 terms. We have George Conway. He's the board president for the Society of the Rule of Law, something that's very much in jeopardy. The president and founder of the Anti-Psychopath PAC, or Political Action Committee. And he was a founder of the Lincoln Project. We have Asha Rangappa, who's a senior lecturer at Yale University's Jackson Institute for Global Affairs, was previously a special agent in the New York division of the FBI, specializing in counterintelligence operations. Welcome. And we have Maya Wiley, President and CEO of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, and she previously served as a Henry Cohen Professor of Public and Urban Policy at the New School. So welcome, everybody. So first question for Congressman Dent. What impact do you see a second Trump administration having on the business, the everyday functionality of bipartisan governance? Because we often hear the question, people who are skeptical will say, well, the institutions will hold. We have checks and balances. So my question to you is, how would this operate with political actors who no longer believe in checks and balances on executive power?
Yeah, it's interesting. When I came to Congress, I used to really believe strongly in this notion of separation of powers. But when I got to Washington over time, and it got worse, that we don't have a system of separation of powers as much as we have a system of separation of parties. That is, the members of the legislative body, the Congress, say, of your party, you feel it's your obligation to protect the president of your party, even if it means subordinating your institutional interests. And I've seen that happen time and again. Frankly, both sides have done it. And I'll give you a very specific example. One of the last things I did when I was in the U.S. Congress, I was chair of the Military Construction VA Appropriations Subcommittee, and I wrote the bill for military construction projects. And basically, Donald Trump wanted to redirect about $3.5 billion worth of military construction funds to pay for the border wall. Now, we can have a great debate whether or not we should be building additional barriers, but an executive cannot move appropriated money, appropriated by law, for one purpose, which was military construction projects, which I should note that the President and the Secretary of Defense at the time, Jim Mattis, signed off on, and we supported those projects, and they wanted to move them for a border wall. And I said, well, it's not permissible. It's a complete violation of Congress's Article I authority. It's outrageous. And there were so many folks, I thought my fellow appropriators, I was on the committee, I thought they'd all unanimously say, this is a terrible idea. And that didn't happen, obviously. I just left Congress when this had happened. I had written the bill, and the new year then Trump decided to redirect the funds. So that's a very specific example how Congress surrendered its own authority to the executive. I can make the same case. President Biden was going to move. Well, he's still doing it. He's trying to move hundreds of billions of dollars for student debt relief. I'm not here to argue the policy of whether or not student debt relief is a noble purpose. The question is, should an executive be able to move that kind of money without a vote of the Congress? I think the answer is clearly no. And this is what I have noticed, that so many people have in Washington, I've heard in voters, they would say to me, why don't you vote for Donald Trump? They'd say to me in 2016, it's all about the judges. I said, well, it's actually not all about the judges, but that's what they would say. So subordinate your congressional authority to Article 3, subordinate yourself to Article 1, and so we have a weaker Congress. So what I'm hoping for is a divided government. I always think one chamber controlled by one party and the other by the other party actually prevents anyone from doing too much damage. So that's kind of, I've gotten cynical about the whole thing, but that's one thing I have noticed. So sure, that's the answer to this question. But Congress has some authorities, though. It can, Trump has talked about impounding funds. Okay, well then Congress could turn around and say, well, there are things that you want too. We can hold up funding as well. It can be done. So there are mechanisms for Congress to push back, and so in many ways. So I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you. All right, George, departing from your considerations of the pathologies of Trump's personality, the impact of him feeling now he would have immunity for his actions, and if we add in the intentions of Project 2025 to, this is a quote, they say there's an existential need for a huge expansion of the vast powers of the executive. So can you discuss what would happen in practice to governance, to the DOJ, to how people would behave around him, whether it's his cabinet officials or We already know how the Supreme Court behaves, but can you discuss those kinds of things, connecting the executive branch that he, as he and his allies envision it, his personality, and the state of the judiciary?
Well, it's interesting because we chatted on the way in, and one of the things that I always observed was the people who understood Trump the earliest and the most, with the most clarity, and I confess I was not one, were the historians, like Ruth, and people in foreign policy who studied history, and military people in the military who understood history on the one hand, and also the psychiatrists and the psychologists. And I'm not joking, because they understood the interrelationship between this type of personality, a malignant narcissist, a narcissistic sociopath, call it what you will, a megalomaniac, and the great tyrants of history and cult leaders and whatnot. And what we are going to see in the next term is what we almost saw, or we started to see at the end of the first term. I mean, he believes that everything is about him. There is no other to him. That is his personality. And that's part of the reason, part of the reason why a lot of people don't understand him and don't take him seriously, even though they see a lot of his negative character traits, is they find the depths of his depravity too difficult to comprehend. And and that's one of the reasons why I'm doing some of the things that I've been doing lately to try to bring that out. But the point of this is that everything is about him. The government is about him. That's what he wanted it to be and thought it would be his first term in office. That's why he kept talking about my generals and my this and my that. He views, and that's why he would tell people, oh, go ahead and do that. I'll pardon you. It's all about him. It's all about pleasing him and his glory and his power at any given moment. And it's not about the American people, let alone faithfully executing the laws and the Constitution of the United States. And what's going to be different this time around is he understands that he cannot have these people who have these crazy, incomprehensible values to him of worshiping the rule of law and wanting to obey the law and obey rules and worrying about other people and worrying about the public good. Those people aren't going to be around him this time. He understands the need to exclude those people because they kept him from successfully executing the coup that he tried to execute in January of 2021. And so that's one of the things, that's the thing that's the scariest about what a second Trump term would be like. And in terms of the legal protections we have against that, well, I mean, obviously there are the civil service rules, the civil service laws, and I mean they have a plan to try to get around those. I don't know that it's legal, but they will try. And the other thing about it is if you work in the government, you know, you didn't sign up for this if you're a civil servant. You didn't sign up to fight the government you want to work for. And so there are going to be some people who are going to try to be heroes and be whistleblowers, and you'll see them on 60 Minutes with their faces blacked out, and you'll see confidential sources on the Washington Post. But then you're going to see a lot of other people who are just going to say, that's enough, I've had enough, I don't want to do this anymore. I could make more money on the outside, or I'm just going to sit out quietly and hide my next 2 years so I can get my pension. And you're going to see a lot of people who think that, you know, their survival is going to depend on pleasing the incoming administration. And you're going to see a lot of people, the people who would obey the law in terms of the political appointees, the people who would have respect for the law, aren't going into this administration, and everybody else is going to have to basically choose between fighting or succumbing. And that's a scary thought. And there's something, you know, I know people don't like the Hitler analogies and so on and so forth, but, you know, Ruth will tell you, and the people who study history the way she does tell you, that this is exactly the same kind of personality trait the set of personality traits we're dealing with here. There was something called, maybe I have it wrong, Ruth, but you would know it because you actually study history. There was something called like leaning toward the Fuhrer.
Oh,
working toward the Fuhrer, where basically everyone, what happened in Nazi Germany is that people didn't have to ask for permission to do things they knew that the Fuhrer would have wanted them to do. And you're going to see a lot of that in a second Trump administration. And an example I think of, which is relatively benign, is remember when they hid the USS John McCain from Trump so that he wouldn't get mad? Like, he didn't ask them to do that. They figured out to do that all by themselves. And that's one of the things that's what we're going to see in a second Trump administration is you're going to see all sorts of people coming out of the woodwork trying to execute his will without even being told. And that's, to me, one of the more frightening aspects about it.
Yeah, what the working toward the Fuhrer is first formulated by historian Ian Kershaw. And it's a style of acting, it's a practice under not only that dictatorship, because Hitler was, he slept till 11 every day, he didn't really like to work too much, and he was very vague about a lot of his pronouncements, and so his various high officials would compete to interpret his meaning and be like even more Hitler than Hitler was. And so that's the working toward the Fuhrer, to compete to please him because he is a bit vague, and that vagueness, or mercurial, right? So this kind of personality. So that's the working toward the Fuhrer.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, George. Asha, I'm very haunted as somebody who's worked in archives, where there are very strict rules about what you can take in, how you can touch the documents. I'm so haunted by the images of those classified documents just strewn about at Mar-a-Lago and treated like trash. That really, really upsets me. And that's just one, example of, what would the impact be of a second Trump administration with a president who is so careless and malevolent about those things? What would the impact be on intelligence, our intelligence apparatus, and on our national security? I know it's a very broad question, but your thoughts.
Yes, so I would break this down into three big threats that I see. And I think we should start with an aspect of the second Trump term that they've been really explicit about, which is the purging of civil servants, including the intelligence community, and replacing them with loyalists. And I think it's really important to understand the ramifications of something like that. And I think that there are both domestic ramifications and international ones. So I'll start with the domestic ones. You probably know that the FBI and CIA has a bit of a checkered past in the 60s and 70s, which all came to light during the Church and Pike hearings. And as a result of that, there were a lot of reforms that came about in the FBI. Those were the Attorney General guidelines, which govern how the FBI conducts investigations. And that really creates a buffer between what the executive branch can do and American civil liberties. The Attorney General guidelines are promulgated by the Attorney General. They are not law. They can be rescinded by the Attorney General. And I should just note that the FBI itself does not have a legislative charter. It is a creation of the Attorney General's authority. So this idea that you could, I guess technically, I don't know practically how it would work, dissolve the FBI is, I think, theoretically possible. But the point is that you can remove those bulwarks and basically put new guidelines in its place. If you have people who are willing to go along with it, if you've purged this entire force and replaced it with people who are there to go after the people, to investigate the people that you want, that is going to be fair game. Warrantless surveillance. During the Bush administration, the NSA engaged in warrantless surveillance of Americans. And we have a lot of legislation that has come out of that. Once again, that was conducted by the NSA. I don't know what the recourse would be if, in the name of national security and an imminent threat, you had someone in the NSA willing to go along with it. Even in the Bush administration, remember that the people who pushed back were John Ashcroft and Robert Mueller and James Comey. We are not going to have people like that in these agencies. Again, we're talking about Kash Patel, maybe Sidney Powell. I mean, I don't even know, Michael Flynn, who will be running these things. The second, I think, big possibility is the fabrication of intelligence. Again, we have seen this before. We saw this in the lead up to the invasion of Iraq. And that was under the Bush administration, where you might think, Okay, there was pressure there. I mean, just imagine that exponentially. The ramifications here are that intelligence can be used to justify a number of other measures. Remember that in the lead up to the 2020 election, or in the aftermath of the 2020 election, the Trump administration had a draft executive order written up that was going to suggest that there had been foreign interference in the election that would provide justification for the military to seize voting machines. I mean, it sounds incredibly far-fetched, but one thing to remember is that when it comes to national security, intelligence, executive branch determinations of what to do in the name of national security and under Article 2 powers, courts are incredibly deferential. And it's really hard to see who would actually stop him even if some crazy pants idea like that were to be put into effect and there was, intelligence that was justifying it. Then there's the international ramifications. We all know that Trump and now Vance are willing to give Ukraine to Putin. And I think that both that combined with the classified documents issue, I think we can expect that our allies will not share intelligence with us. I don't see why it would be in any national interest to do so. On that front, also, in terms of NATO, I think people should understand, I saw on Twitter, Trump would not be able to unilaterally withdraw from NATO. Who cares? He's the commander-in-chief. If a NATO country were attacked, all he has to do is refuse to send our forces over. So he has immense control, immense deference from the courts on that. And then finally, to wrap this up all with a bow, I will add that with the partnership between Trump and Elon Musk, what is being created is a domestic propaganda apparatus. We see this in effect, obviously, in autocratic countries, but also in India under Modi. And so all of this will also be reinforced with a perception management operation that is deployed against domestic audiences in order to continue to justify the various actions that he's taking. So those, to me, are the big intelligence picture.
Yeah, thank you. That's very sobering. And I think, one of the most dispiriting things I'm observing is the obeying in advance is already lining up, and it's happening with media companies. Also, I caught this news item that I keep thinking about, that at the RNC, dozens of ambassadors and diplomats from democracies came to the RNC to kind of get the ear already of Republican officials, because they felt that there was such a good chance that Trump would be elected, and they didn't want to be taken by surprise as they were in 2016. And this made me upset, because it was like, does our vote, the election hasn't happened, does our vote not matter? We haven't voted yet. But it's, considering he's a convicted felon and they tried to overthrow the government, and many of them are criminals, it seemed to be legitimizing and in a resigned manner. So these are these insidious ways that criminality can be legitimized before it becomes official, an administration. So, okay, Maya, my question for you is, how would, we got a preview of this in the summer of 2020. How would a second Trump administration affect civil rights? And I don't know if people, but I don't know if people remember not only all the other things that went on, but during the Trump administration, federal agencies such as the Office of Civil Rights inside the Department of Health and Human Services, Roger Severino, who's big in Project 2025, this was his thing. Civil rights was redefined as the rights of white Christians. So that's, so Maya, how do you, it's a large question again, but if you can touch on a few aspects of what we could expect.
It's gonna be bad, y'all. And that is my legal opinion. But let me just start by saying it's a real privilege to be on this panel with these incredible leaders, thinkers, and whoever thought I have Donald Trump to thank for this? So it hadn't all been bad. But no, I mean, I say that in a joking way, but actually I mean that with deep sincerity. Because there was a time in this country, and it wasn't that long ago, where we had bipartisanship on many key and core civil rights principles, laws, and enforcement, one of them being voting rights. That is no longer the case. And I just want to make this one real point really quickly before I answer the direct question, which is that that's been under attack since 2008. Well, really, it's been under attack ever since we won it in 1965. But I mean in earnest and aggressively in state houses after 2008 and truly aggressively in 2010. And so I only want to say that because when we are talking about Donald Trump, and I cannot get the image of George at the RNC with that truck behind him with this, it's a good one, you should go look for that. But it is, yes, all the things that all the panelists have already said, but it is what he has been able to capture that was already here. And the erosion of rights that was already under attack, and the Shelby decision in 2013 that was John Roberts, the institutionalist, who was not, so I just want to say that. So we do have to think about this and what we're seeing, particularly in Project 2025, because it is the roadmap and the blueprint, and it will exist whether or not we have Donald Trump in office. It will be significantly worse if he is, because it is fundamentally about executive action, right? Whose would be the executive? Exactly. So let's just back up and say, what does that mean for civil rights laws? Well, if you look at Project 2025, what it explicitly says is a family is a nuclear family that is biologically driven by gender identity, which means if you're LGBTQ, you are not inscribed in the philosophy and the underpinnings of how Project 2025 is looking at how the executive branch will read, consider, and utilize its powers, its resources, and its obligation to enforce civil rights laws. And that does happen through executive agencies. So when you couple who is in the White House with the Supreme Court's immunity decision, which said basically absolute immunity on how you do any power that is named in the Constitution, okay, big gray area there. Not, I mean, in terms of how you then would consider what is absolutely immune, particularly from criminal prosecution, but couple that with the official acts, with how pardons are utilized, but also appointments and other forms of executive action that could be considered official acts. The way in which that opinion was designed leaves open, in my view, and interpretation and those of many other lawyers, essentially I don't know what's unofficial. And I certainly don't know how we would define when it takes away even the ability of independent oversight to examine motive and evidence to even determine why someone who is an autocrat might be using what can be named as an official act. How do you know it's for the cult of personality and personal power over a function of government? Particularly when it's deeply ideologically embedded. Right? So if you put that together with the Chevron doctrine, with the most recent court, where basically what we said is, oh, rather than allowing career civil servants, I mean, when we talk and map it to what Asha was saying about who is in these positions, Project 2025, it isn't only about national security. It's about all these various positions that are civil service positions in executive branches of government made up by people who are experts in their area, right? The doctrine said, well, you know, if the statute's not so clear, if it can be interpreted different ways, we're gonna defer to the experts who, by the way, are the nonpartisan people, at least if Project 2025 does not come to fruition, right? So when we put all that together, and the fact that white ethno-Christianity is embedded as what must be protected by civil rights laws. I sat in a House Oversight and Accountability Committee hearing just a few weeks ago. And in that hearing, all I heard, and I was sitting with the author of Chapter 18. Go read it. Eliminating labor rights, which are civil rights, saying we don't want a Department of Education, saying that the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which is why we have the ability of the Department of Education, among others, to say you can't segregate the classroom or the school. You can't engage in book banning that if it creates a hostile environment that get kids hurt, whether it's anti-Semitism, whether it's transphobia, whether it's any of the things that are protected. That's not just about one group of people. That's about everyone. Except now it's going to be inscribed with the lens, and it was very explicit in the House Oversight Committee that white men are deeply in need of civil rights protections. I got you. Okay. Now, let's be very clear, and this is the biggest deceit.
I'm glad she's on my side.
This is the new governing civil rights coalition right here. But this is the point. Part of what it is communicating, and it does go into this mis and disinformation apparatus that has been driving the great replacement theory.
That's right.
That has created violence in our politics, violence in our communities, and a permission for some to actual acts of mass shootings against people who are not white because of, and I mean, anti-Semitic, Islamophobic, anti-Arab American, anti-LGBTQ, anti-women, anti-Mexican, anti-anybody who doesn't fit this very narrow, quote, endangered category, even though what we got was civil rights enforcement, with the powers of federal government to use the power of the agencies for guidance, for rulemaking, to the public process, and for utilizing its resources to ensure that every single person in this country has the right to learn, has the right to be treated fairly at work, has the right to be organized, has a right to vote with the protections of government, like when the Department of Justice went to 24 states to poll monitor in 2022 because of the tremendous threats of violence on simply the ability for people to vote, particularly if they were not white, not male, and not in a red district, which is not democracy. And so when we're talking about the narrative underpinning this, it is that civil rights laws did not help New York City police officers who were white, male, and short get a job. Guess what civil rights laws did? It helped short white men get jobs on the New York City Police Department because the gender exclusions based on height requirements for the job, which women brought, excluded white men who were under 5'6" tall. Because civil rights laws do protect everyone, and what they're essentially saying is Donald Trump, as the avatar for driving our fear of the fact that we're plural, can utilize that power and weaponize a minority to think that its government is better serving them when it only serves them, when in truth, it has always been about an us.
Yeah, thank you, Maya. Thank you. And, when we're thinking a lot, I know many of us, about the problem of denial, that can't happen here, or it won't be so bad. And when I wrote my book, which looks over 100 years of history, I found that every time people were not ready to see what was in front of them. And one of the main things is that they said, well, I'm not a Jew, so it's not going to involve me, right? So now, and so on. I'm not a leftist, so the military coup that we feel might be planned, or when it happened, it's not going to bother me. And that's always wrong, as Maya's saying. So now, we see at the RNC people holding up the signs, mass deportation, and we can feel like, well, we're not undocumented immigrants, so we're going to be just fine. So now is the time to have conversations if you know people who think that way, because it's always affecting all of us, right? So we have a kind of lightning round of second questions that can be commenting on what you've heard, or like a pathway for action, or so Congressman, in terms of governance, I imagine if they come in, they're going to be preoccupied with giving life to these sham, like the subcommittee on the weaponization of government. They'll be preoccupied with investigating the investigators, with creating and wasting, I call this garbage politics, right? Wasting taxpayers' money, wasting time on revenge politics. Is there, if you think that is true, and that would be part of what governance is for them, what are the recourses against this?
Well, I think they will spend a lot of time on all sorts of investigations because they won't be legislating. And who knows what the majority, we don't know who's going to control the Congress right now.
Right.
So that could affect, what types of hearings. But if Republicans control the House, they certainly will engage in a lot of these types of investigations. If they have a majority, it'll be a very slim one. And I suspect, look at the majority now, it's a dysfunctional majority. They can't even pass a legislative appropriations bill last week. I mean, they can't do that. So I suspect they will spend a lot of time on these types of hearings. I do want to respond to something that was said earlier. I don't use Hitler analogies. I go to Germany a lot. I was just over there. And and it was raised by the Germans about Hitler, Trump. And they said, no. These are authorities. They said, Trump is not like Hitler. They said he's much more like Kaiser Wilhelm. Kaiser Wilhelm, who was the king of Germany during World War I, was a narcissist. He was a buffoonish figure who just sought attention constantly. They said he is much more like him. Hitler had an ideology. You can read Mein Kampf. But that was Trump. That was the German figure. But I just wanted to share that. One other thing, too, that the Congress should do, and I made this point when I served as well, when in the name of national security, when Donald Trump imposed tariffs on steel and aluminum. And I thought, okay, here's a great opportunity for Republicans to stand on a core principle and say, okay, we believe in trade liberalization, open markets, and by the way, a tariff is a tax. No tax should be levied in the name of national security without a vote of the United States Congress. Pretty straightforward, and they need to find those types of opportunities. I worry that they're not going to be able to do that, because when you become less a party based on principles, like the Constitution, like free markets, like fiscal discipline, or muscular national security, foreign policy, and you become much more focused on personalities, you tend just to ignore principles and just do what that one individual wants. And that's what keeps me up at night. But I still have faith that a lot of our institutions are going to hold. I know a lot of people don't share that opinion, but I do. Thank you.
And you've been in them, so that opinion is valuable. So George, one of the upsetting things that I saw during the first Trump administration is, and onward, through the whole saga of trying to overthrow the government, subvert the election, is a total collapse of professional ethics among legal profession, among judges, what can be done? Are there things that can be done now to kind of bolster these, or to, I know, what's your opinion about, because it's a political culture thing, right? And corruption flourishes when people no longer value or reward professional ethics?
Well, I think there have been things that have been going on that are good. I mean, of course, it will be could be undone in one day in November. But I mean, for example, there's this group, this wonderful group called Project 65, which basically filed bar complaints against all of the lawyers, starting, I think it was a list of 65, who participated in the attempted coup in January of 2021. And there have been quite a number of suspensions and disbarments, most notably Rudy Giuliani. We've seen a whole bunch of them, and I think that's been a very, very positive thing. I think the January 6th prosecutions that have been conducted by the Justice Department have taught a lesson to a lot of people that they have to think twice before they engage in that kind of mob violence. I mean, I wish they'd gotten started with the higher-ups a little earlier, but that, I mean, can't have everything. And I think that's all been very positive. But if Trump wins, that's all gone.
Yeah.
That's all gone because we know who's going to make the rules. We're gonna see all sorts of argument. You're gonna see expanded immunity arguments. I mean, obviously, he's the one who has the broadest kind of immunity, as Maya was saying. But we're gonna see, we'll see a back sliding, and that's what happens and Ruth, you could go on for days about this in authoritarian regimes or semi-fascist, or the tendency is that whatever the law only applies to the people we don't like, it doesn't apply to us.
Yeah.
That's the fundamental thing, and what we will see is corruption on a scale like you have never seen in this country in our lifetimes.
Yeah.
And that's what will happen.
Thank you. I'm told we have to leave time for questions, but we want to get another round of answers from Asha and Maya. So, are there? I'll give the same question to you in your sphere. Are there things that can be done, or now, to kind of, or anything that's done now could just be undone when they come in terms of protecting intelligence? And it's a tough one, I know.
This wasn't on my sheet to prepare for.
So say what is on your sheet.
No, I mean, I honestly think no.
Yeah.
Listen, I mean, what we've seen is the most egregious, breach of intelligence, probably since Robert Hansen, with, these volumes of classified documents that were literally found in a public place, or semi-public place, with people coming through, people that that our intelligence community has identified as foreign agents in Mar-a-Lago who have targeted it. So, I believe that a lot of that has already been compromised.
Yeah.
The best thing that we could do now, I mean, hopefully we are conducting a damage assessment. Ideally, we would have held him accountable for that. But I just think, Ruth, the bottom line is that at this point, our guardrails have failed.
Yeah.
I use a Titanic analogy, which is the Titanic was unsinkable because the hull was comprised of compartments that were ostensibly not all supposed to flood, right? Mm-hmm. If you hit it in one place, it was going to only be limited there, and then you would still stay afloat. Well, the Titanic hit the iceberg in such a precise way that it cut through all of those compartments and flooded most of them enough to sink. And all of those compartments, whether it's checks and balances, the impeachment process, the rule of law, the good judgment of people to not nominate an insurrectionist and felon for the presidency, have all failed.
Yeah.
And so it's now just our vote.
Yeah. And that's the purpose of this conference, as sobering as it is, to assess through expert opinion the state of things, as dire as it is. So Maya, very briefly, for an enormous, what would you recommend that people want to do something? We have 3 months. Yes, that's it.
Autocracy only happens when we, the people, don't get together and say, no, you won't. That's it. This is not over. This isn't happening. We have every ability to stop it. If we stop allowing people to be barred from the ballot, if we start addressing directly that diversity, equity, inclusion is actually about a plural democracy, and if we start saying to everyone we know exactly what's at stake. And I mean everything from, do you want to be able to get overtime pay? Do you want to have an education department that invests in schools? Do you want to ensure that people can organize? Do you want the Department of Justice to be the department for the people or the department for the president? What do you want? Because that is what's on the ballot. And if we show up, and this is why voter suppression is such a critical benefit to autocracy, but what we have not been able to, that what we have not yet lost, is the fact that the majority of this country actually thinks we need a federal government that serves people.
Well put.
And not a president. And that's our power.
Yeah, well put. So we have time for just a few questions. I believe we have, there's a roving mic, is that true? We'll take this gentleman, but I think we need someone bringing a mic. Thank you very much. And please, in the interest of time, make your question quite brief.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, one thing that you can do is you can come to the rally, the Stop Project 2025 rally in Times Square this Saturday at 7 p.m. So everyone here is invited. I'm J.W. Walker from StopTheCoop2025.org. I want to go back to the thing that you brought up earlier about obeying in advance, because I thought that that was very important. I'm an organizer in the LGBTQ community, and one of the things that we saw during the Pride season this year was a concerted effort to push corporations to pull their sponsorship from LGBTQ Pride events. We have seen a concerted effort around the country to push corporations to eliminate DEI programs. This is a spreading, metastasizing thing that is all about sort of protecting themselves for a possible Trump administration. We've also seen it in the nonprofit world, where grantors, where granting organizations are refusing to give money to certain things because they feel they might be too political or get them in trouble. So I'd love to hear some of you talk about that.
Would someone like to? That's again. That's why I mentioned it. We see it with media companies. We see, it's a huge problem, and it's. By the way, it's a problem, and it's behavior that has accompanied other episodes of authoritarianism in the past. Would anyone like to take that on?
Yeah, so we're actually working a lot as a civil rights community with corporations. It's a lot of, and this is exactly the point. When those who support autocracy use their power to create fear amongst everyone, they win. So part of what we have to do is, and I'm just going to say it, I want corporations to be afraid of me. I mean, and I don't mean that in a negative way. I'm all for people having corporations and jobs and some of the good things they do for communities. The point is that they're not feeling the pressure on the other side. And this is when I said we have to say, no, D&I means exactly what it should mean in this democracy, which is that there is a place for all of us. We benefit when we're all together, and that we recognize that if a Sebastian Gorka calls a Kamala Harris in a derogatory way a woman and a colored, that is exactly what happens when you move away from diversity, equity, inclusion. So say it loud, say it proud, and demand that corporations do too.
That's right. Thank you. So we're going to take another question. Yes. Yeah, that's fine. Does someone have a mic that side of the room?
Thank you. Going to your point about voting, I'm a little bit negative about that being the last thing, because I think even if we vote, And I think after what happened this weekend, we see a movement starting, and people and the young people getting very excited. Even if we win, it's not going to be enough, because we know that they are talking about civil war and they're getting prepared. And I think we have to think further than voting, even though I fully agree with what you're saying, but what else can we do?
Oh, my point from the beginning is it's not over with an election, even if the autocrat doesn't win, because the forces that have created this movement for autocracy are well-financed and are not going away. That's not my point. We've been fighting this, but I just want to say it, because I've been black all my life. There's never been a day we haven't had to fight for democracy in my lifetime, in my parents' lifetime, in their parents' lifetime. Democracy is not a promise, it's a commitment. So let's stay committed.
Would someone else like to comment on that? Because this specter of civil war, I'm not minimizing it, because all the threat levels are up, but it's also psychological warfare to make people despair, stay away from the ballot box.
I worry that regardless of the outcome of this election, that there will be civil disorder. And I hope I'm wrong, because on the Trump side, he'll say, if I don't win, you won't have a country anymore. It's all over. And that's obviously a big statement. And the other side says, if we don't win, we're not going to have a democracy anymore. We're going to become an autocratic dictatorship. And so we've made these stakes so high that somebody's going to lose, and the other side's not going to be happy. And that's what I fear more than anything. How do you bring people back together again after we've kind of raised the stakes the way we have?
Yeah. I think it's a little more one-sided than that.
No,
I mean,
no, I understand.
I mean that in
Understand
the, I know what you're saying. What I think is, what the problem we have is we have a large segment of the American population that doesn't believe in facts, doesn't believe in reason, doesn't believe in logic, doesn't believe in reality, doesn't believe in law, doesn't believe in the Constitution, and has just forsaken all of those things for the sake of worshiping and following one man, because it's simpler. You don't have to think. I mean, Maya and I have lots of disagreements. When we talk about civil rights,
He's a dog lover, I'm a cat lover.
I know, but no, if we went through, we could have she beat the living daylights out of me because she knows more about this stuff. But we would have disagreements on things relating to specific issues and cases of dealing with civil rights. None of that matters right now. Okay, none of that matters to me right now, because we can't have that civil debate in a context where some people don't even want to have civil debate. They want a simple answer. They don't want to hear about the nuances that she and I would bring out in a discussion, and maybe I persuade her of some things, maybe she persuade me of some things. They don't want nuance. They want simplicity, the simplicity of authoritarianism, the simplicity of a buffoon who just spouts out falsehoods that they want to believe.
That's right. And Asha?
Yeah, I think, I loved Ruth's book, and I watched her videos leading into the 2020 election, and I think a big key is we do have to think long-term, but if it's to the point where it starts to become overwhelming and it leads to apathy, you need to stop, unplug, get off Twitter, whatever it is. The first step is to vote. There is more work to be done after that, but one of the things that I think is really important is to keep hope and positivity as your guiding principle. And one of the best stories that are, that I think encapsulates this, it's in your book, is the Chilean resistance that voted out Pinochet. This was a dictator who was there for 17 years. And people came together, formed a coalition across policy differences, and with a message of hope, we're able to vote that person out. So I think if you can actually remove a dictator by voting, we can keep one from coming in, and then we will do the work that needs to be done after that.
So that's a perfect ending to our panel, and thank you all. There'll be a lunch panel now, and thank you for my wonderful
I should have
co-panelists.
said, and you can sign up for andstillivote.org on the Leadership Conference website, recruiting poll workers. There is a lot happening, not only elections and for post-election.
All right, thank you, everyone.